Blocking, also known as the foundation of animation. It's the act of setting your first storytelling poses in a shot. Basically, you don't just go ahead and animate a shot. You have to put blocking in there just to start setting those foundations, start making those layers that you can add on to later. There's various types of blocking and various different, levels of progression. There's a rough block. A rough block might be 2 or 3 poses, right? Your character might just be like, throughout the whole thing, and that's it. That's a rough block. It really depends on where you're working, what kind of studio it is and what the directors want to see usually. Rough blocking is usually a little too rough in my opinion, because 3 poses isn't really enough to get things going, but it's enough to be like, hey, I did this in like 30 minutes. Here's a rough block. Is it working, or is like the camera composition working? It gives you a good idea of that stuff. You have like regular blocking in between rough and blocking plus. Regular blocking is just your regular blocking. You got a few poses in there, which is kind of what we're going to do. We're going to do 5 to 15 poses. Your blocking plus is basically going to be blocking out the whole shot, maybe anywhere between 2 to 5 frames. Every 2 to 5 frames is going to have a key. And that's called a blocking plus, because you'll see if you do it right, it's almost going to look like stop motion animation, right? It's going to look like Coraline. It's going to look like a lot of the Leica movies. It's going to look like you're doing a stop motion because you don't have the interpolation, but you have a key every 3 frames. So your shot's basically going to be fairly in good condition once you get to blocking plus. All you have to do at that point is hit spline and, hope for the best that all those in-betweens look great. And then you have splocking. When people say splocking, it's a mix between spline and blocking. Some people like to animate this way. I personally don't love splocking because it shows you more bad stuff than good stuff, right? When things are moving in stepped, it leaves it to my imagination what's happening in between. And I go, oh, okay, like this will look good when I finish it. Whereas when you do splock, all that stuff is not left to your imagination. You see it as it shows up on screen and you're kind of like, oh, this in between doesn't look very good. Do I really want to be showing this? But some people like splocking, and sometimes it's better if you have like a large moving camera to do it this way. Going back to the house analogy, right? We talked about how your shot is a house, and what people see is the beautiful outside and the doors and the windows and all that. And what people don't see is all the foundations and cements and bricks that you guys are laying right now as we speak, right? Blocking is the next step in that, right? Now we're setting up those foundations. Now we're really putting up the base of the house before we start making it look pretty. That house has to stand before we can actually live in it. The important thing with blocking, you guys, is to take your time. Take your time with blocking. Most of your animation, I think, is going to happen in blocking, like a good half chunk of it. You want to make sure that this foundation is good before you go to the next step. Right? Same thing as reference. You want all those choices to be thought of and specific before you go to the next step. If something is left like a question mark, right? You're kind of like, bop, figure it out as I go. You're just setting yourself up to struggle a little bit and maybe not get the results that you plan for. So don't rush, take your time, and we'll get through it together. Okay? So analogies, more analogies, right? We got your house. What if your shot is like a brick, a giant piece of marble, right? Kind of like sculptors use to make statues. When you block, you take your time, you give a chisel at a time. Pretty soon, it takes time. It's probably the most time-consuming process in animation to actually set those poses and start blocking everything out when you have nothing, right? But if you put in the time and you do it all right, you eventually have a beautiful piece of animation, right? Beautiful statue, looks amazing. You love it. Everyone loves it. You get put in art museums. End of story. Don't rush, because what happens if you rush? Rushing your blocking is akin to taking that same block of marble and going at it with like a chainsaw or like a pickaxe. You're just like going at it. You're not being methodical. You're just hammering away, right? And what happens if you do that? Bad shot, right? Don't rush your blocking. Cannot stress this enough. I see a lot of people that just want to like go ahead, right? From what we're supposed to be doing. They're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to put in like 30 poses. I'm just going to do like a ton of poses here. But then those poses aren't working, right? Those poses are just all over the place. And it's like, you're rushing, you're going too fast. You're not thinking in terms of what we're going to be talking about: silhouette, line of action, appealing poses, all this stuff that has to come together for the shot to feel good. So you're like, all right, I get it. My shot's like a thing of marble. My shot's like a house. No more analogies, right? But what if I told you your shot is like your bones, right? You need strong bones in your shot. If you don't have bones, you're blocking. Your final animation looks like goop. And that's the last analogy, I promise. So, strong poses. There are a few concepts that lead to very strong poses if, as an animator, you employ them constantly. And I mean, just like everything you look at, you just go through that mental checklist, like bam, 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 bam. I'm doing line of action is the first. So what does line of action do? Basically, line of action in its simplest form is you draw a line through your pose. You draw a line straight through the pose and you see where that line is taking you, right? It usually follows a very clear sort of shape that is influencing what the character is about to do or the force of direction that a character is employing in their action. Basically, it just makes a pose more dynamic and interesting. If we look at Tom over here, you'll see that the pose on the left, he's very crumpled up and he's very weird looking as he's trying to hold this club. Where is he swinging that? His elbows are everywhere. There's knees popping all over the place. It's not a very strong pose. The corrected pose on the right, it's just one clear C shape. We know that that C is going to go like a catapult, just whoosh, flip onto the other side, right? So on the right, Tom has a very strong line of action, which clarifies movement, right? This is clarifying the movement of where he's about to go. So again, line of action makes for strong, dynamic poses and clarifies movement. On top of that, it also focuses the audience's attention. When you point at something, right, and your whole body is being used to point at it, you're kind of like arcing yourself towards the point of interest. The audience is gonna look there. So you are using line of action as a way to tell the audience where to look in your shot. If you have a shot where you're going like, look at this, right? You want your line of action to flow through you into what you're looking. And that's just part of the appeal of what we do as animators every day, is to try and direct the audience attention where it needs to be, right? Even subconsciously. It doesn't have to be like, look over here at my face, right? There can be all kinds of things that we're using to direct that audience's attention as we see fit. So line of action, very important to use this. We look at this every day. A lot of times we'll look at a shot and, you know, a supervisor will just go through and just start drawing lines of action through everything and just be like, oh, this line of action could be stronger. Maybe if we move the hip more like this and we just like bent the body back and, you know, instead of being just like a straight line, you're more like a dynamic curved line, it works a little better. So here's some line of action on top with some rule of thirds. We talked about the rule of thirds a little bit last time, but here it is. Just again, you draw 2 lines vertically, 2 lines horizontally at the, you know, the 1/3 marks on each side of the screen. And where those lines intersect, that's the rule of thirds. These are the points of interest where the eyes want to go usually. That isn't to say that you can't have something centered in camera. It's not like everything has to be on these, but usually if you have 2 points of interest, you want to put them on thirds, because that way you are using your screen space more effectively and you are giving yourself the better composition. You'll notice that with Syndrome over here from Incredibles, all the lines are pointing towards his face. Everything in this is made to point towards his face. You know, even though he's shooting a beam forward, you'll notice that if we just draw a line from the beam through his arm, right, it comes right up to his face. The trees, the background, even the lines on his face, just like are all curling in towards the center of his face. That's where we want to look, right? That we want to see that expression of just, you know, anger and evil in him, right? As he's just like shooting this beam forward. It's a very masterfully crafted shot in that regard. None of this is left to chance, by the way. This is a lot of stuff that you miss watching a movie, but this is all very, very conscious efforts on the part of the animators, storyboarders, and, you know, anyone involved in the movies. This is what they do all day long. You'll notice that even for Mr. Incredible here, buildings are kind of pointing towards him. He is dead center, but pointing at his face, right? There's a lot of lines that are taking us in to sort of look at what he's doing in the middle here. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually moved these buildings in the background just to frame him better, because maybe there was a building that was like behind them. They probably just grabbed those, moved them so that he was nice and silhouetted in this shot.